What's up, guys? Alright, so by the title of this video, I'm going to be talking about theology and my personal conceptualization of God. Now, I'm going to try to blow past this because there's a few things that I need to explain about my conceptualization of God that are difficult for me to explain because I don't have a scientist here to explain those portions. So I'm going to be giving you uh, a rough explanation and then point you in the right direction where you can understand that more in depth. And yes, I am talking about science because my conceptualization of God is closer to a scientific model. All right. So I know that's a really big claim, being that a lot of people will say that they can prove their God with science, and then they start to talk about how bananas fit in your hand and blah, blah, blah. Now, a little bit about me. I was raised Christian. I went from Mormon to Pentecostal. I had family that was Catholic, but I roughly was raised as a Pentecostal Christian. I started to be interested in Eastern philosophies and religions because at the time I was really into Kung Fu, specifically Wing Chun, and Wing Chun and Tai Chi led me to Taoism. Now, at the time, I was also reading up on Buddhism, which I enjoyed a lot, but I was more in tuned with Taoism. It was closer to my speed, and it made more sense to me. Later on, I started studying more about Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, Sufi Islam, the Gnostics, which was the Gnostics Gospels, which is Gnosticism, which is technically Christian, but they have a completely different viewpoint on what God is and, all of that. And amongst things involving Judaism, I started to learn a lot about Kabbalah. And I went through all of these things, and I went through a whole bunch of stuff, learning about all of these religions. I spent some time learning and practicing certain pagan religions Norse paganism and Celtic paganism. And There was a few other things that I went into. I also started studying a lot of African spirituality and Afro-Caribbean spirituality and Mesoamerican spirituality and religions and such. But ultimately, all of my studies led me to my own conceptualization of what I think God is. Now, all right. So, first things first, this is the part that's hard for me to explain because my conceptualization of God is tied to the Big Bang. Now, technically, we can't prove the Big Bang because we're only able to see so far away or so far into the past. When you take an image of something that's very far away, you're not actually seeing it how it is today. You're seeing it as it was in the past because it took light years for that light to reach our machines that are taking in those images, right? So there is a certain amount of space that we're able to get to, and beyond that, we don't know. So technically speaking, we don't know how old the universe is, but there are things on Earth older than the amount of time we can see into the past. So we know that we are restricted in how far into the past we can see when we're looking out into outer space, but knowing that there are things on Earth older than that, we know that the universe is older than the amount of time we can see into the past. Now, the reason why I mention this is because this is completely tied to the Big Bang. I believe that there was a beginning of the universe because there are certain components to imagining a eternal universe that makes it not work. Because if the universe was at a spot and it started to expand and it was expanding infinitely, then it would have taken an infinite amount of time for it to have expanded to the point that it is now where Earth exists. Meaning that if the universe was expanding infinitely, then technically the Earth shouldn't exist, because it would have took literally forever to get to this point. Knowing that the universe is expanding at a certain rate and all of these things are already here, we know that the expansion and the coolness of the universe is at this level, and the closer it gets to that it retracts when you're going back in time, the universe would have been closer together, hotter, and so on, right? So with that information, it leads us to believe that the universe at some point was, the things in the universe were closer together, hotter, moving faster, and so on. This means, if that's true, that means that at some point, everything was together in one singular point, meaning the beginning of the universe. Now, if you know about the Big Bang, most people believe that at some point the universe was one singular tiny point, and that tiny point expanded into everything we know today. Now, the thing is this. Expanded. All right, so it expanded from a singular point. Now the thing is this, that when that universe was a singular point, that means that at that moment there was only one thing, and it wasn't the universe yet, because space exists in between the things that currently exist. So if there's only one thing, then that means that there is nothing inside of it and nothing outside of it. If there's only one thing, then you can't split that thing into smaller things, because there's only one. And this means that at that moment, when the universe was one singular point, technically there was no space and no time, meaning that this singular point both existed and did not exist simultaneously. And that's what I believe God is. It is this primal force that existed and did not exist simultaneously. And for some reason, because technically speaking, we don't know what caused this point to expand, but something caused it to expand. And by it expanding, the one became many, and space was introduced between these things, giving the arising of space. Now that there was space, and there were things within that space, and those things move, that motion is measured with time. In order for there to be time, there has to be things moving. If a thing is here and it moved here, then it took time for that movement. So God, in my conceptualization, is this point of existence and non-existence simultaneously that somehow expanded and became everything that we see today. And by that expansion, from that expansion arose the emergence of space and time. And this leads me to a further interpretation of God. Now, why would I call this God? Why not just call it the Big Bang? You see, the thing is that if this thing both existed and did not exist simultaneously, that is outside of the realm of natural. So this would, by my standard, this would qualify it to be called supernatural because it's not abiding by the normal natural laws. In this space, in not even space, because space didn't exist yet, but within that, whatever that thing was, it was not abiding by the natural laws of physics and all of the laws that we know. Not so I would qualify it as supernatural. And once space and time was emerged, then that gave space for physics to work. And according to physics, time is only linear to us because of our perception. But cosmically, time is, it's possible that time is more in a, I can't pronounce the word correctly, but Mobius loop or Mobius. I'm going to say Mobius, but I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. But ultimately, what this leads me to believe is that the past, present, and future are actually happening simultaneously. And we perceive the present moment. And the things that already happened exist within our minds as the past. And the things that has not happened don't currently exist, but we're able to imagine what could happen. And if you're using logic and reasoning, and you're able to pick up on trends, you can have a better state of prediction and understand what might happen in the future. Now, what does this mean? If physics tells us that the past, present, and future is happening simultaneously, then that means that this singular point, and also we would have to account for the fact that information can't be destroyed, as in, if the entire world had amnesia and forgot that there was a tide, the tide will still exist. The information that the tide is there still exists, meaning that that information is independent from our acknowledgement. So the information doesn't get destroyed, which means that this singular point before the Big Bang possessed all of the information of the entire universe from its beginning to its end, if there even is an end. So already I'm prescribing this force, or whatever you want to call this thing, supernatural. I'm saying that it's supernatural. I'm saying that it's omniscient, but there's a tweak on it because I'm not sure if it knows, because omniscient implies that it knows everything. I'm not implying that it knows everything. I'm just implying that it possessed all of the information. And then I would also prescribe omnipotent, because if this one singular thing expanded and became everything that we know, that means that everything that is possible to be done, everything that can be done, is done by this singular point, meaning that it is omnipotent. It can do everything that can be done. And there is one more that I want to hit, but I can't remember it. Omnipresent. Omnipresent. Yeah. If this thing expanded, and by its expansion, space and time emerged from it, that means that this thing is everything and is everywhere. Therefore, omnipresent. So omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, and supernatural. And I believe that with those four qualities, this would lead me to believe that it is, I would say, rational to say that we can label this thing God, because it possesses these four qualities that are usually attributed to a God. Now, going a little deeper into this, I'm going to see how I can manage this. I don't want to make this video too long. I believe that this concept of God is like the highest state of the highest state of divinity. And from this comes everything that we know. Meaning that every God, every entity, every spirit, every angel, demon, this, that, all of these spiritual things that are spoken about are ultimately a piece of this thing, of this singular point from which everything expanded. And I would also lead into another explanation that I believe this is because all of these entities and gods and angels and saints and demons and any spiritual entity you can think of is ultimately an aspect of our minds. It's an aspect of our subconscious. It's an aspect of our inner universe. And there are people that have made claims that our consciousness is intrinsically tied to reality. And I know that sounds like obvious, like, of course, we need consciousness to be able to be aware of reality. But as in that they're tied together, as in if it wasn't for consciousness, then would reality exist? Like, could reality exist independent from consciousness? Now, that is a much deeper thing that I can't necessarily go into because I simply don't know enough to be able to explain it. I have my theories, but ultimately, even the smartest scientists don't fully understand consciousness yet. But I am led to believe that our consciousness is intrinsically tied to reality. And through that consciousness exists all of these entities that we either come across or create ourselves. And these entities are ultimately pieces of our subconscious interacting with each other. And to get a more in-depth understanding of how archetypes work and what that even means, I would suggest you read a lot of Carl Jung, and that would give you a deeper understanding on the topic. But ultimately, I feel like these highest forms of divinity that us, spiritual people follow are ultimately our higher selves, or pieces of our subconscious that have become independent within our own minds. And we give them some sort of agency. And we experience them as if they have some sort of agency. But I don't know if they truly have agency or if we're just interacting with ourselves. And this is why I say that my conceptualization of God is a little closer to a scientific model, because I'm not claiming that God is a man in the sky with a beard that wags his finger at you. I'm claiming that God is an entity that created the universe via a force that we cannot comprehend, via a force that we cannot even understand how it existed, because technically it did not exist. If there was no space or time, then it did not exist because there was nothing to exist within. Now, I digress. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is that I feel this conceptualization of God is a little closer to something that we might be able to prove. Because this idea of the moment before the Big Bang, whatever was there being God, it's possible to prove what was there, or it might, actually we can't say if it's possible or not, but it's easier to comprehend it's the possibility rather than a man in the sky that, like a Casper, saying, don't do that and do this. But even this concept of man in the sky with a beard wagging his finger can be proven when taking the psychological approach and saying that it is a aspect of our subconscious that we created to sort of be our own overseer. And we attribute to this archetype, this aspect of our subconscious, the highest values and morals and ethics and standards that we perceive to be perfect. So ultimately, we create this entity to be better than us, so that it guides us into becoming a better version of ourselves. So I believe this is technically possible to prove, but we would have to wait until we know more about consciousness and we know more about the subconscious, and my conceptualization of God itself. We would need to understand what was before the Big Bang. Once we know that, I would either have confirmation of my theory or hypothesis, or I would have to reevaluate my conceptualization. Alright guys, that was enough. This video is pretty long, so I'm going to leave it here. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation, this video. If you did, hit a like, subscribe, ask me some questions. Maybe we can BS about theology and talk about all that good stuff. Yeah, and next time I'm going to talk more about my philosophical beliefs, and hopefully I'll touch more on my philosophical beliefs that have stemmed from my theological beliefs, and work something out there. Alright guys, peace out.